people to information, how to say. And I would like to pass the word to journalists from those territories who have very bright experiences, and they can tell more.
Great, thank you, Oksana.
Good afternoon. I have from 3 months ago I had to leave Crimea. I've lived 1 year in Crimea. Following the occupation, I have tried to fulfill my professional duties to the maximum extent possible, and I would think about what is happening in Crimea. At the moment, there's an ongoing policy implemented by the occupying regime starting from the first day following the intrusion of Russian armed forces without insignia. Information platform or media space is being clearly mopped up, so to speak. Independent media outlets are being closed. The Crimean Tatar channel has been closed down, and there are no radio stations which have been working in Crimea. There are no editorial houses or professional journalists who have been working in accordance with the widely held journalist standards. Those who remained in Crimea and do not face any problems, they are the propagandists who fully support the current regime in Crimea. They do not criticize the government, and they are engaged in a persistent campaign against their own colleagues, which has manifested itself in the closure of the ATR channel. The situation is critical. There are those independent journalists who continue working there. They are forced to work surreptitiously because they are under the spotlight from law enforcement agencies. They are facing of detention. They might be summoned up for interrogation or arrested, and these cases continue to be registered in Crimea. I would like to say that the picture is very grim, and the situation is going to continue. When it comes to access to information, there is no access to information. Those journalists who could ask unpleasant questions to those who call themselves the government in Crimea, those journalists which carry out investigation into cases of corruption, do not have an opportunity directly contact those people simply because they are not allowed to take part in those events which are organized by the so-called Crimean authorities. Following the annexation until June of 2014, the Center for Journalist Investigation has registered more than 100 cases of assaults against journalists, which included illegalization, battering, seizure of equipment, destruction of equipment. The pro-Russian authorities did not carry out any investigation into these cases, bringing the perpetrators to justice. In fact, the perpetrators are well known. This is the self-defense forces of Crimea, which are accountable to Sergei Aksyonov, the head of Crimea. This is his personal unit, which enjoys financial support coming from Crimean budget, which in fact is financed by Russian budget. What is it that we can undertake given this situation? There's no clear solution to the problem faced by those journalists who are living in Crimea at the moment. Thing is that their colleagues living in other parts of Ukraine do not have any levers they could use in order to protect their own colleagues who are in Crimea. The only instrument we have is to cover the situation in Crimea to the maximum extent possible. This information is not being disseminated in Crimea. Mass political persecutions or detentions of journalists trampling upon the media outlets is something not being covered. There's no newspaper that would publish stories about it. This is information that one can only download in the internet. It is important to find common Russian colleagues who respect law and see the real situation in Crimea, we should find ways to protect our colleagues who remain insular, because the working environment for them became unbearable. I understand that for many journalists and human rights organizations which are working in Russia, speaking of Crimea is a very serious ethical issue. However, we should think in a balanced way about what is more important to us. How we're going to be labeled as a result of us speaking about Crimea, or what's more important is us helping those journalists who are working in Crimea. It is important for everyone to understand what is truly happening. Peninsula. The thing is that Crimea finds itself completely isolated. Few pieces of information manage to find its way into Crimea, and we perhaps don't even know 1/10 of what is truly happening in Crimea. That reigns in Crimea is such that one part of the population is intimidated, others have been affected by the obsession. They are searching for internal enemy, and the authorities are trying to the grievances of Crimean citizens against the so-called fifth column or other agents who might be engaged in separatist activity. They are speaking about Western agents and so on and so forth. In fact, all those who allow themselves to criticize the authorities, receive information, publish it, they might be accused of being Western agents, the fifth column, and so on and so forth. And the next step is being summed up for interrogation in Federal Security Forces Office, or serious punishment can be imposed against these people. Thank you very much.
Maybe I wasn't very clear in how I expressed my position. It must be reported from Crimea. It must be written about Crimea. We need as much information as possible from it. It is a saddening trend when Russian and foreign reporters and journalists come to Crimea only once a year. Some people come there to celebrate the referendum, and 1 year since it, some people come to commemorate the deportation of Crimea Tatars. However, everyday laws are banned there. There are no Ukrainian laws, there are no Russian laws. There is only one force there, the occupation, and it needs to be reported. If there are resources, if there are funds available, they should be channeled to broadcast from Crimea. I was saying that an ethical problem there for international organizations, for monitoring missions stemming from working in Crimea. It is also important to find a format to be in Crimea and to witness what is going on there, to be inside. Right now, there is the Crimean Field Human Rights Mission. It is an initiative which reports every month. It is probably the only source, as far as I'm informed, stable source of information. And we need to work on that. It is clear that the so-called powers to be in Crimea today need one-sided reporting or no reporting at all. However, we haven't buried the region. We need to know what's going on there. We need to find solutions. We need to find ways. We need to know more than is the case today on Crimea. I haven't published everything I have. In Kerch, somebody was held through his activity in social media. He set up a web page, Right Sector Kerch. People from FSB came in early morning hours to his apartment. They shot his dog and they took him away. And his family turned on him. They are no longer talking to him. They're not even trying. So I couldn't verify the data. I just turn the data over to human rights defenders. Somebody needs to be here. Somebody needs to establish formats. Somebody needs to look for. We need to actively be in touch with our Russian colleagues who haven't turned away from the international humanitarian law, who see Crimea as a source of problem, who see also Crimea as a potential for contacts for bridge countries. It is, of course, a pipe dream so far, because to find common ground, it's not up to date now. It will come in the future.
Response from the panel. Okay. There was a question over here, Valentina Samar, Crimean Center for Investigation.
Valentina Samar,
Zerkal and Idele, Center for Journalism, Crimea. I would like to make a collective remark when it comes to different statements that have been voiced here, that there's nothing to film in Crimea. There are no dead bodies, no blood, no sensational images. At the same time, the conflict is in its intensive stage in Donbass. Therefore, all media spotlight is shining on Donbass. I would like to say that 1 year after the annexation of Crimea, the destruction of world security system is something that is an important news item. Human rights which are being violated en masse in this area is something that has to be covered, and there are signs that there are discrimination on national grounds, and the leader of Crimean Tatar people is saying that. There's another topic which is not of interest to anyone. Huge military base under construction in Crimea, which is constantly reinforced by new military hardware, which includes airplanes and other military units, or military hardware rather, which with nuclear weapons. Either we start publishing articles about the creation of the largest military base, not only in Mediterranean and Black Sea area. This might actually change the balance of power in the area. For example, there are the silos which remained intact after Ukraine regained its independence, and once nuclear weapons are placed in the silos, and perhaps what will happen, are we going to wait until the nuclear threat becomes apparent, and only then, when it becomes apparent, we're going to publish articles about it? And unfortunately, we cannot work in Crimea, and therefore I would like to ask you to do it for us. We cannot keep track of people's quality of life. There are environmental problems which emerge due to barbaric decisions that have been taken in order to the lack of water supply in Crimea, as well as intensive militarization of the entire. We can analyze this region, and I would like to thank Russian journalists Gazeta and Rebecca. He published an article about and the economy of the DPR. Together with Alexei, we cannot do our job there, and this are inaccessible to us. How Russian journalists have the opportunity and leave. We have to get a full picture of what is happening there, and we should not listen to the statements uttered by Marchenko and local leaders. We should find out about what is happening, because tomorrow a humanitarian catastrophe might unfold, because Russia is not going to support regions, and the collapsing economy of which is in a state of war will not allow Ukraine to carry out its mission. Therefore, the whole world might find itself in a situation where they will have to supply Donbass, which is collapse. Our foreign colleagues have been constantly asking how they could help us, and I told them they have to show solidarity, they have to work there we cannot do so. There's a persecution of dissenters, of activists, those who work for stations. We cannot carry out investigations into the cases of kidnapping, and I would like to kindly ask you to do so for us on our behalf. And to mention is that it is unfortunate that ways to guarantee security of journalists in occupied territories is the topic that was not discussed sufficiently. Words about the measures that OSCE could have used, what United Nations could undertake to achieve this objective, what international organizations could undertake together with national institutions. I believe this is the homework for us, and in my opinion, this is a question that has an agenda during each international negotiation in any format, be it Minsk format, OSCE format, or Normandy format. There should be high on the agenda, namely the need to ensure that the of journalists is safeguarded. This is one of the factors which is important, and I should be interested in it. Thank you.
Anyone